Hi, welcome, and thank you everybody for choosing this session out of the many great offerings at the conference today. I don't know what the weather's like in Ames, where the conference would usually be, but I have to say it's the first time in many years that the weather is gorgeous today for the PFI conference. So no worries about driving. I'm going to do some brief introductions of the three presenters. While I'm doing that, please, if you would, stick in the chat your name and your just so, kind of where you're from in Iowa or in the US, and what you do, if you're a farmer, farm advocate, other things, so other people can see who you are. And then I will start quickly with an introduction of myself. I'm a fifth generation Iowan and a longtime member of PFI. I spent quite a few years, 20 some, as the marketing director at a wholesale natural organic food distribution company called Blooming Prairie here in Iowa. And the last 15 years, I've been working at Red Tomato, which is a small nonprofit in the Northeast. We're in Providence, Rhode Island right now, just moved. And we work with fruit and vegetable growers throughout that region to market their product into wholesale and retail grocery chains. We also have a program called Eco and Eco Fruit that Michael's going to talk a little bit more about. I'm a certified apple nerd and have a book called Good Apples that would ordinarily be on the silent auction table if I were there to make a donation. And so I grew up in Ames, and PFI always really feels like coming home to me. I'm really glad to be here. Next, I'll introduce Julie Sweetland, our main presenter this morning. Julie is our framing goddess or framing guru, I will say. She has led the research on this project and also helped shape our communications efforts and work. Fabulous person to work with. She is a senior advisor at the Frameworks Institute in Washington, D.C., where she helps develop and promote and educate about their research and programs. She's a sociolinguist with a MS and a PhD in linguistics from Stanford University. And her background before coming to Frameworks was as a classroom teacher and instructional designer and a teacher's teacher, really. She has a long background in language and communications. Her research on language and race and language and how students learn. And she's published. You can find more about her on the Frameworks website. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her daughter. And our third presenter will be Michael Rozyne. I'm introducing him last because he's going to start us off. Michael is the longtime founder of Red Tomato. Before that, he spent many years starting out working on an organic farm, working for also a cooperative wholesale distributor of natural and organic foods in the Northeast, and left there to become one of the three founders of a company called Equal Exchange, which was the first fair trade coffee company. Equal Exchange, just in the US, I should say. Equal Exchange just celebrated 25-year anniversary. Michael left Equal Exchange in 1996 to start Red Tomato, to bring some of those principles of fair trade and dignity pricing for growers to fruit and vegetable growing in the Northeast and in the US. He's a visionary, a longtime innovator of strategies for market-based change and for connecting growers, particularly mid-sized growers, to wholesale markets. He, along with several other nonprofits and a group of growers, founded the Eco Apple program that he's going to talk about in a minute. And he lives in Massachusetts with his wife. He's also a farm gardener. His main crop is not apples or tomatoes, although he grows great tomatoes, but garlic. He's well known around our parts for his fabulous crop of garlic every year. So with that, I will introduce you to Michael Rozyne, who's a visionary and a longtime friend. He spoke at PFI many years ago at a conference that also featured some Rick Schneiders from Cisco and some other people on an interesting panel. And I think that conference was part of how Michael and I reconnected and how I ended up at Red Tomato after all those years. So thank PFI for that as well. And Michael, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sue. Well, if you're at this conference, then I know that you know quite a bit from your own experience about why the public's understanding about farming and food and agriculture is a big deal. So we're going to actually start by asking you to stir inside of your own brain for a minute and answer these questions in the chat box. What are things about farming that the public and policy makers that the public just doesn't get? And how does that lack of understanding get in the way of your work, what you do? Take a minute, jot down some thoughts, and throw them in the chat box. Keep working at it, keep taking notes. And if you're one of those talented multitaskers, then I'm going to tell you my answer to these questions while you keep on writing your own. So, Red Tomato, our mission is all about farm viability, and we really focus on mid-sized farmers that do at least some wholesaling. So we're working with growers that are generally 50 acres to 500 acres. We work with some smaller and some bigger. And what we are trying to do is help them gain access to wholesale markets, differentiate their products so they don't get seen as commodities. And we help with the logistics, managing their supply chains, making the sale, supporting them with marketing and promotion. Our signature program is the Eco Apple third-party certification that Sue mentioned, slogan local done right. And in this program, we have called together a couple of dozen regional tree fruit growers, apples and peaches, who use advanced integrated pest management, advanced IPM practices. When the program began, the focus was on pesticide reduction and on risk reduction for the growers. But what we've done is put scientists, growers, and marketers together on the same team to help lift up the mid-sized growers of our region. So the program is really an attempt to explain to people in the marketplace what growers do and why this responsible approach to farming offers really great products that we hope they'll be interested in. And what I found over time, explaining this over 20 years in demos at stores through all of the materials that we've put out, is that no matter how good our explanation is, the question always comes back, even when people are trying to listen carefully. Oh, so these apples are organic? And if you're a tree fruit grower, or probably a grower of any kind, and you're farming in the eastern part of the United States, you know that it's virtually impossible to raise apples at scale using certified organic methods. And this certification is an attempt to get in there. And it was through this process that I realized how much of a communication challenge, what a steep uphill climb we had to get through to average American consumers with how our farmers actually farm. Public mindsets have to change first before an awful lot of other things we want to have happen will happen. And so this led to the launching of the Farming and Food Narrative Project, where we are trying to develop tools and frames to shift public understanding. We identified Frameworks Institute in DC as a logical partner in this journey. They're a think tank of social scientists, and the one that we have worked with, they have a broad team of talent, but the person that we work with most closely is Julie Sweetland. Julie today will give you a taste of the research that's been going on for 4.5 years and will hopefully open up a level of understanding in you about what we can all do together to improve the public's understanding of farming. Julie.
Great. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Sue, for making this connection with PFI. Sue and I visited the PFI offices right after the presidential primaries in 2020. And while that somehow feels like a lifetime ago, not just a year ago, I remember clearly how savvy and passionate and thoughtful everyone was. So I'm happy to have a chance to return to Iowa, even if just virtually. So at Frameworks, we think a lot about breaking through conversations that are stuck, like the story Michael just shared, and like some of the similar experiences you all just described. The lever we use them to get unstuck is public thinking. There is untapped power, we believe, in building public understanding. Too often, social issues get negotiated only between the directly interested groups and policymakers or other decision makers, basically experts talking to other experts, and the public is left out. Is it hard to hear me? No? Okay. So, um, and that matters because, for one, the public is a major driver of change. Public opinion creates incentives and disincentives for decision makers' actions. Or, as Abraham Lincoln put it much more poetically, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And the other thing is if we aren't talking to the public, then we're leaving the way they think about an issue up for grabs. When people lack ways to think through and reason through an issue for themselves, they're susceptible to misinformation, spin, and manipulation, frankly, or they might just be left with outdated information. So, to change the dynamics on an issue, we begin by working to understand current public thinking and where it differs from where we might hope it is. And let me just show you how we do that, or show you what we found when we did this. So, um, to map public thinking, we find it helpful to create a map of the fields thinking to begin with, so that we can see the disconnects and pinpoint the patterns of thinking that we need to change. And so, to create this map, we sent our social scientists out to do 12-hour-long interviews with crop farming experts, including that's 12 interviews, each of an hour long, not 12 hours, including academic researchers, policy experts, extension specialists, and farmers. Most of this research was done December 2016. From that, we surfaced common themes and shared assumptions. And then we took that draft, what we heard, and into a feedback session with more experts and project stakeholders. And we refined that, including going to get additional data. Then we went to the public. And mostly in 2018, we conducted in-depth, semi-structured interviews. Each of those lasted up to 2 hours, and we did them in 4 different states and regions. Overall, we talked to, including rural and urban and suburban counties. We interviewed 24 participants, which yielded close to 1,000 pages of transcripted interview data. So I'm happy to take more questions about methods. If for some reason you are a methods geek, put them in the chat if you have them. But I want to get to the content. And as I walk through this summary of what we found, I want to invite you to connect this graphic to the misunderstandings and knowledge gaps that you and your peers flagged, and similar to the story Michael told. I believe we have a handout for this that we can put in the chat too. Is that right? We can give both,
Yes.
but it's in the report as well.
Yeah, there are handouts posted in the window above the chat. And at the end, we'll give you our website, which also has the reports and some of the background that Julie's talking about.
Okay, I'm having one of those like way too many Zoom little bits here. So I'm trying to drag this window down so I can see it a little bit better. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. All right, here's the content. So first we found that while farmers and agricultural experts think of farming as a complex expert practice, the public thinks of it as really tough manual labor, but ultimately simple, right? Plant, harvest, repeat. Um, and where the field thinks of the many effects of farming on society as economic, environmental, and health impacts, the public really zeroes in on the human health impacts of the food they themselves consume. And where the field thinks that for what counts as good farming, well, there's a whole diversity of approaches and practices, and what is the best practice is largely contextual. The public believes that natural is best, is kind of as close, as little human interference as possible is seen as natural, and they have collapsed the idea of natural with organic, with that kind of branded term. In terms of larger, sustainability issues, the field, the experts we talked to saw that as a core concept, that it involved, economic, environmental, and social factors, whereas the public did not recognize the term. If they did, they only thought about it in environmental terms and didn't think about the social and economic aspects of sustainability. And if we think about what drives farmers and farming system to choose more or less sustainable practices, the experts we talked to saw that as a many competing pressures and a lot of things that shape that. The public believes that the farmers do what the consumers want, and that's the consumer choices, consumer preferences are really the only driver and pressure shaping, kind of incentive for farmers. And that in the end, it comes down to either farmers, wanting to do what consumers want to keep their business going, or their own, altruistic purity of ethics of wanting to protect the land or do right by their workers, etc. And then because this project had its roots, as Michael mentioned, in thinking about integrated pest management as one type of block, right? Disconnect between the public and the field. We did dig into issues of pest management a little bit more deeply. So the field believes that, there's a diversity of pests, and so you've got to have a diversity of strategies. And chemical pesticides or synthetic pesticides are one necessary tool in a large toolbox. The public thinks of just insects as the only pests, and they think of pesticides or pest management as strictly basically spraying. And they believe that is really never acceptable because of its effects on human health. And in terms of soil management, a closely related concept that came up again and again and again as a critical piece of good farming and just viable farming. And so it was a central concern for experts. The public does not think about, it never came up. They might talk about, you're working the land or putting things in the dirt, but this concept of soil health or soil management is just a completely missing concept for the public. So, sorry, one more, sorry. And then in terms of what do we do about this, the field is thinking about adapting for the future. The public is stuck in the past, a very romanticized version of, the agrarian past. The solutions the field wants to see is invest in research, support, and really offer public support for more sustainable practices. The only thing the public could think about was, let's just make sure the farmers are not doing the one thing we believe, one thing we know about farming, and the one thing we think is bad, which is, regulating those harmful practices and those sprays. So this is really important to understand because if we don't point people in a new direction, we're kind of just stuck with the public understanding that isn't in favor of this forward-looking advances in farming and this kinds of supports we need. So to point people in a new direction, we have to make a lot of adjustments in the way we talk about our issues. And over 20 years, the frameworks, and drawing from insights from the social sciences and social movements, the Frameworks Institute has created something like a catalog of different framing decisions. Each of these matter, like messengers, for instance. If the right person can build trust and credibility, our tone can invite people to listen and learn or alienate them. But if we were, so lots of different choices you can make that make up frames, but if we were pressed to pick one framing superpower, we would choose explanation. We believe deeply in the power of how. The way people understand a problem has an outsized effect on the solutions that they believe are appropriate. And the way that we present ourselves as communicators, as complainers or explainers, also really makes a difference. When we truly explain our issues, we show people how we think rather than telling them what to think or what they should think. And so it's really important to use this. If we don't, we end up with this problem. Often we are really good at talking about the problems on the left side of the equation and all the things we want to see happen and all the things people should do in the world, but we don't give people a way to think about how those things connect. Here's an example that I saw here on the Metro of this missing step 2 in Washington, D.C. You can see here, these were in the Metro, in the subway system, encouraging people to use the subway system, and really leaning into the environmental benefits of mass transit. I guess I'm reading a lot in here because there's not a lot here, but it says more CO2 could lead to less coffee beans, keep the caffeine flowing, take Metro. So first of all, we've researched this and the public does not really know what carbon dioxide is. They kind of remember it from 5th grade science, that plants breathe it out and we breathe it in, or is it the other way around? They're not sure. They definitely don't know that it's the main driver of climate change. And they definitely don't know that climate change is reducing crop yields. In fact, we've had people tell us that the planet is getting warmer and that's good for plants. Right, and hold on, CO2, plants do eat CO2. If we have more CO2, isn't that good for plants? We've had people tell us that they kind of are hopeful that this will be really good for world hunger, for instance. So there's a lot of missing steps here for the public. And so without, these are that missing process. Explanation does something very different than this. It spells out what affects what. It specifies, another way of saying the same thing, the process that links cause and effect. And description, in contrast, are like these. It just offers two things that are associated, but without a mechanism of how they connect. Another way of putting this is description is what is happening, like these examples. Explanation says how it happens, has a mechanism, a process step. It shows what affects what. Now, I've took a minute to explain all this because explanation, our research has shown, can as much as double public support for an issue when compared with description. And so it's important for you to be skilled in knowing when you're doing description and when you're doing explanation, and to be able to explain. So I'm going to work through 5 quick examples to build our ability to notice when the mechanism is MIA. None of these actually are about food or farming. I think that will make it easier, but that will get you ready for your final exam, which is when you have to do an example on farming. So here we go. Our exercise is this. I'm going to show you 5 short pairs of 5 pairs of short texts. And your job is just to decide, look at them and decide if you can tell which one is the explanation and which one is the description. Here we go. All right, I'm going to show the answer. It is A, definitely A. We often provide a definition of a key concept and confuse that with explanation, which is what has happened in B here. Definition can help build a general understanding of one concept, but it doesn't put two concepts in conversation with each other. It doesn't show us what is affecting what. It doesn't unleash the power of how. All right, second one. Answer is B. A emphasizes who is having a problem. B puts in a cause, a root cause, an underlying mechanism. It says why the problem might be happening. One more, or no, two more, but next one. Which one is actually explaining here? All right, tricky trick. A has the word cause in it, and I've told you cause is very important 100 times already, but that doesn't mean that it has a causal pathway or a mechanism in the text. B has a mechanism at work that associates age and falls, right? And it's what's that middle step 2 is the loss of flexibility. Now, why does that matter? Because now people can see a place to intervene. We can increase people's flexibility. Whereas an A, what's the solution? Stop people from getting older? That's not a good solution. So thinking about those mechanisms as a place where we can make a difference is another reason that explaining to the public enlists them in supporting our cause. All right, one more, next one. The explanation is A. And this one has one of my favorite go-to framing phrases. X helps to explain why. So the stress of social isolation helps to explain why LGBT plus youth are twice as likely. I often scan a communication, and if I can't plug that formula in somewhere, I know I'm missing an opportunity for explanation. Last one. All right, the answer is B. In B, there's a mechanism that connects the root cause to the outcome. And that is warmer temperatures and record-breaking, stronger storms, right? And if you felt like B could be even more explanatory, bonus framing points for you. We'll return to another example in just a few moments. So hopefully this has sensitized you to seeing like where those causal mechanisms need to be in, which is the kind of the root, key to explanation. Here's an example with based on a longer example from our own issue area. So on the green side, we have a generic topic sentence. There are many practices, and then 2 sentences that offer lists. Living up to that topic sentence's promise that there are many practices. Lists are often a telltale sign that the communicator is describing, not explaining. Lists fill us up with a lot of what, and we usually don't have a lot of room left for how. To unleash the power of how, we can give people some background and then show them how something works and then explain the outcomes, like this one on the right. So first we open with some background and explanation of what sustainability means. And then an explanation of one way that cover crops work. They keep roots in the ground year round and protect the soil from rain and wind. And then the effect that prevents soil loss and erosion. Now, this on the cream side is less comprehensive. It focuses on just one sustainable practice and even just one type of cover cropping. It sheds all the things to make room for explanation. It goes deeper rather than broader. Our research has consistently found that this narrowing is helpful. Again, it can lead up to twice the support for an issue than just lists or descriptions with the missing mechanism. And our interpretation of this is when you're inviting people to think through something, you're actually teaching them rather than just kind of throwing information at them. And so that's why you get a different result. So at Frameworks, we call this strategy an explanatory chain. Like well-placed dominoes in a domino run, each link in the chain leads right to the next one. There's a cause and effect sequence, and the connections between ideas are emphasized with lots of causal transition words or things like this helps to explain why, guiding people's understanding of what affects what. A strong chain is built from links, and it could connect to a solution. So basically the links are, background, mechanism, and you can have more than one mechanism sometimes, and then the outcome of that process. So if we built an example like this, if we just said climate change is diminishing crop yields, that's not a good chain. That's missing the mechanism link. It doesn't tell people how. Warmer climate, stronger storms, harmed crops. That's pretty good because that helps us see. It gives the human brain the satisfying sense of, aha, I see how it works. And the little boost of dopamine that comes from solving the puzzle helps our communication stick. So this second example gets a thumbs up for including a how link, a mechanism. But to get from a mere thumbs up to full-on framing applause, we need yet another link, one that shows people a place where intervention and action makes sense. And the thumbs up link, that part's not quite there. Many people wouldn't know how to change a warmer climate. And heck, this time of year, being warmer might not even sound so bad. So in the example at the bottom, I've shifted the emphasis and placed fossil fuels as the initiating link. That's something concrete and clear that we could change. And this chain helps us understand what affects what, but also what we could do to what we could mess with, right, or to improve the situation. So you can see there's a bit of an art in choosing the links in one of these explanatory chains. So now I would love for you to try your hand at this art. It's time for you to give it a go. We're going to put this into practice by building our own explanatory chains. So I invite you to create an explanatory chain on the topic of groundwater pollution. What affects what to what end? You'd want to put in a background link, a mechanism. You can use more than one mechanism if you want to make a longer change, and then one of the effects. And you just need to identify the links like I did on the previous slide. Let me see if I can go back there. Just the thing, the arrows, the thing, the arrows. You don't have to write out a beautiful, fully formed sentence. So I want you to we'll pause for a few minutes and add your chain to the chat, putting the little arrow chains in the marks between each link. Just draw on your own knowledge. There are many right answers to this. If for some reason you don't want to write about groundwater pollution, please feel free to select your own topic. Just label your topic in your chat. I think I'm going to play a short song and give you all some time to think and write. Go. All right, virtual insanity, all done. Let's look in the chat, and I'm just going to comment on a couple of these. And thank you everyone for such enthusiastic participation. Sally Worley has a very simple one. I think it's really elegant. Bare ground, leaching nutrients, groundwater pollution, right? So you need to, after we spell it out, what are the nutrients that are getting into the ground? You might need to use a different word than nutrients if you want people to understand it as pollution. I think the public would think nutrients is a good thing, pollution's a bad thing. But that's nice with just nice three little chains. Deborah Finks is a little bit above. I noticed this one. It's a positive chain, right? I think many of the ones I showed were negative, right? Like this underlying terrible thing leads to this negative outcome. Deborah's taken the less taken path, but one we should probably all take more often, which is if we do this good thing, cover crops, then there's less fertilizer runoff because those plants are using the fertilizer, I would assume, and then that gives us cleaner water. So bonus framing points for going positive. I love how Claire Zabel, sorry, few down, has kind of a human action in this, right? So over applying nitrogen fertilizer, and the human impact at the end, right? Which isn't just water, but drinking water. So all of these are great. I just wanted to lift out a couple to emphasize that when you are, there is no such thing as an unframed communication. You are always making choices about what to put in, what to leave out, and how to describe each link. And so as you are communicating, thinking about your audience, as Helen just asked about, what can you assume they know? What can you assume they don't know? And really thinking about every communication, not as an exercise in persuasion, but as an exercise in education and in inviting shared reasoning through a problem. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Michael to talk about where the project will go from here. And thanks for playing along with an Explanation Nation.
Thanks, Julie. A year from now, Frameworks will be finishing up its social science research, and we will have framing tools and we'll be offering training. Here are some of the things that you can do with the frames, the tools, the narrative elements that come out of this work. You can find your way to more productive public conversations using these tools and some of the training techniques that will go with them. We will all be able to build understanding of what's actually happening on farms and the factors that shape decisions that get made on farms with the help of these tools. We'll be able to gently, or a little more than gently, shift attitudes, public attitudes, in the direction of collective responsibility in support of good farming. This is a big one here. I think a lot of times we're putting out messages that suggests if farmers did this, then this will happen. If farmers adapted regenerative practices, climate change would be greatly reduced. And it's not that there aren't lots of pearls of wisdom in that, but a lot of times the message is done without explanation. And it also kind of makes it feel that the burden's on farmers, or sometimes it sounds like the burden's on consumers. If people shop differently, the world would change. Or if policymakers would just do this, the world would change. And I think part of what we've been learning and what we're trying to say here is that none of this is what, I don't love this metaphor, but it means something to all of you. These are not silver bullets where you get it, you apply it, you sit back, drink a glass of water and watch the world change. It ain't going to be that way. And I think that one of the outcomes here, I think, will be to use language and understanding that shows collective responsibility. We all have to work together on this, and hopefully some of this language will make it easier to do that. And then lastly, to build support for very specific policies and strategies that lead to positive environmental, economic, and social outcomes. We've been having a pretty interesting conversation about that word policy. So yes, it includes policies that governments enact at all levels, federal, state, and local. But policies also mean forms of collective action that people decide to do things together in all kinds of places and institutions and organizations and farms. So it's a very broad meaning for the word policy. Meanwhile, between now and a year from now, when these tools are fully available, we've got reports available for free online. If you go to the Farming and Food Narrative website, you can download both of these reports. And here's what's going to happen in this year. Frameworks game plan begins with the generation of actual frames, kind of where the last 4 years have led them to. It equips them now to start generating actual language, narrative elements, metaphors, and examples that they can test in the real world with people. And some of the things they do, the initial tests Begin with qualitative investigations, small numbers of people, some deeper dives, conversations, focus group kind of like things, where they ask themselves, are we on the right track? And as they begin to narrow the track and get back, this seems to work, that one doesn't work. They follow what works into larger scale quantitative experiments where they can really test it in broad, many hundreds of respondents. And then, having narrowed down the frames that work the best, they go back to qualitative testing, kind of a final quality control step in focus group kind of research. And it leads to their final report, which we all will have access to a year from now. You can learn about this by signing up for our periodic newsletter. Do it right online. That will get you reports as to how things are going, what trainings seem to be turning up in different places. And we encourage you to share this website and all these materials freely with anyone you think can make good use of them. And we'll hope to see you soon. The support from PFI over the last several years, PFI has sent representatives to events for years now, and we expect that relationship to blossom.
Great. Thank you, Michael and Julie. And I'll just echo briefly before we move to the questions. The resources that are available on the Food Narrative website, which Julie put in the chat, are out there for you to use. It very much. There was a comment in the earlier section about audience and who is hearing your message and how that affects the choice of words like groundwater and cover crops. The tools you're going to get are meant to adapt to your own audiences and messages and goals, not to prescribe, specific words that you're going to use. So we hope that you'll take advantage of what's out there now. We didn't, because of time today, talk much about the second research report that's there. Last year, Frameworks did a media and field frame survey of how the media and how advocacy groups with public audiences talk about these same issues. And there's some really interesting information and analysis in there about how we hear, how consumers and the public take in the current kind of messages that are out there, and a little bit of what the work is ahead of all of us to help shift the frame, as Michael said. So just encourage you to go to that website. The handout that's in the conference section here that you can download also has the website and copies of some of the material that Julie presented. So with that, I'm going to shift. We have plenty of time here for questions and discussion. So I'm going to watch the chat, and please let us know your reactions, thoughts, questions. What else would you like to see from this project? In true PFI fashion, I am astounded that there are 71 people in the room here, and I'm just picturing what that would look like and feel like if we were in one of those big conference rooms. So thank you.
So
sorry, Michael.
yeah, Sue, are you looking for questions on the web right now? I mean, or on the chat box?
I'm watching the conference link for our session, which has the questions and comments. So yeah, I can see that directly. And there's a great comment, Joe Klingelholtz, I bet I mispronounced your name. People love hearing stories about successful change. That's great. The first question from Helena Thompson is there any work around framing white supremacy in farming? And that's a great question. It's one that the core team in the project has definitely spent some time with. So Julie and or Michael, either one, if you want to address that. Thanks for asking it.
Well, it's a great question. I had actually just done a scan up to the things people said people don't get, and was looking for to see which ones of this think the project will have good ways to address. And the issue of structural racism in access to land and capital, so I think that's not all of white supremacy. This project is not taking that on, but some of the inequities rooted in race that play out in particular ways in the farming system. We are doing some work to tackle that. We also, I mentioned in my setup just very briefly that when we brought the, we did an initial draft of the expert story, and it was very focused on farming practices and issues that are making farming harder and less viable these days. And as we brought it to a broader group for feedback, they did the same thing this person just did. It says, hey, what about race and equity here? So we actually intentionally went back and spoke to experts who really have their finger on those sorts of things. So I think if you take a look at the Map the Gaps and the report, which is one of the ones we just flagged, you can see how that's baked in to the problems we're trying to solve. But you're right, it didn't come up on the slide that I showed. I should probably refresh that next time I give it.
I would say that there are definitely groups who are kind of narrowly focused on that breakthrough question. And is this Helenina? Is that the person who's asking this question?
Helena.
If you give us an email address, and maybe we have one, I think I can send you some resources and people who are actually zeroed right in on that question. And at Red Tomato, we work directly and closely with with probably the largest Black-owned farm in Georgia, New Communities, where Shirley Sherrod is active. And there's a workshop Tuesday night that Shirley is giving in the NESOG, the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Working Group, Sankofa series webinar, and it's going to very much focus on what you said and on the work of New Communities to address that question. You could probably make your way to that webinar just by going to the NESOG Sankofa series. But give us your email address and we'll send you more info.
Yeah. Couple of good questions popping up. One question about the focus group research, Julie, just a little more background. And then a second question, just so you can be thinking about this one as well, from Holly. As individuals, what steps can we start to take to reframe the narrative in our communities, and what kind of spaces should we be seeking out for this kind of conversation?
Ooh. That's a good question. So in terms of the small group qualitative research that we'll do, so what we'll do is we'll run basically a national large-scale randomized controlled test for frames through a survey experiment. And so that will have several thousand participants in it, and will be representative of American census, kind of representative of the American public. We then look at that data, and if there are things that we feel like we need to dig deeper into, and particularly any kinds of demographic differences we're seeing in that quantitative data, we would shape focus groups, or we call them pure discourse sessions. They're a little different than focus groups, but the picture in your head would be the same. We would shape them based on that. So I don't know who we would put in those sessions yet, because we haven't done the experiment yet, but you could imagine perhaps we see a big urban rural divide on understanding on these issues or how the frames are working. We would set up an urban rural kind of split and dig into that and make sure that the frames how do we need to adapt the frames to work with different groups or that sort of thing. So stay tuned is the answer. The question, what was the other question? Oh, how can we use it now, and what are the kinds of spaces we're looking for?
Yes.
So it's a little hard to answer without knowing a little bit more about the questioner, but this work is designed to shape public conversation. So whatever you think of as the town hall or public square, right, that you're in, that can be a digital public square. Maybe it's your Twitter feed. That can be, actually local politics, but it could be anytime place that people are gathered together in groups to think about what we do together. Those are good places for these conversations. So in terms of how to get started, I would definitely ask you to start by accessing the research that we've got already and take a look at that. You can, there are some real, I think, good advice already in there about things to emphasize, conversations and questions that you're like assumptions and misconceptions you're likely to encounter again and again, and the beginnings of some ways to break through those. But if you took today's lesson and explanation and just thought about how to apply that in all the places where you show up, and where those town halls and public squares are, literal or figurative, I think that's a great way to get going. And also, please let us know of your interest, and you can subscribe to the newsletter, which then makes sure we can keep you in a loop for upcoming trainings and resources as we put them out.
And I'll just take a minute to also refer you to the Frameworks Institute website. They're a long-time research organization, nonprofit. All of their research on lots and lots of topics is available on their website. And I know the core team on this project has sometimes found it really useful to read and see some of the work they've done to reframe issues like early childhood education or public health issues or climate change. And so I'll just put in a plug for Frameworks, making their research really widely available. Some really great questions here. We'll get to as many of them as we can in the last few minutes. Let's see, I don't want to skip anything here. There was a great question about class. How do we address some farmers have resources to make changes and others don't? And how can we direct resources to where they're needed? The economic issues have been a particularly challenging ones for us to try to capture and frame as part of this process. So Michael or Julie, anything you want to respond to?
I feel like we really need to know where that question's coming from, because it's not specifically about framing and communications. I think there's a whole lot wrapped up in that question about how to lift up growers who are under-resourced for all kinds of reasons. And I feel like we need more context to really do justice to that one, Sue.
Sure. Yeah, I would just say that some of the same conversations we've been having about race and equity also are focused on issues of access to resources and land, and that hopefully between the two, those messages are going to be in there. Definitely some of the testing will be important in that. Here's a question I'd really like to get to, which is there some way to foster understanding beyond just framing issues from one side? Most issues are complex without necessarily clear options that benefit all. And there's a particular approach that I'm not familiar with called the National Issues Forum Dialogue. But I think the question, as I am reading it, is can framing help beyond just framing one side of an issue?
So, yes, there are ways that, choices we make about the way we communicate, the tone, establishing the purpose of the conversation, who's invited to the conversation, who's the messenger, all those things are framing the communication. So absolutely. Our approach to framing at Frameworks is goal oriented. We want to use framing to drive a particular type of social change. So we work with partners who have a certain end in mind, one that we believe is supported by science and, driving towards greater equity and prosperity. So those are the projects we take on. We think this one is one of them, and we'll be framing the conversation to advance that point of view. We don't do it in a way that I think is, slick or manipulating people or spin. It really is inviting people to think through an issue. But our goal is to, when they think through that issue, right, they come to some of the same conclusions that we would want to see. So can framing generically work with that? Just, we're just exchanging ideas and we don't have a goal in mind. Absolutely. That's not the project that we're doing just now.
Great. I think that's the last question we have time for. I want to honor the conference schedule here. A couple of us will stay on the chat for a little while and happy to continue the conversation. Sally, I think we're able to do that. There are some good questions, and I want to call up Bonnie's comment about how one reframe that she's currently doing, which is really interesting. And that is, instead of saying thank you for supporting our farm, which implies a little more of a charitable act, she says thank you for shopping here. There's a lot embedded in her comment about agency and responsibility there. Thank you so much to everyone for your comments, for your chat. I would encourage you again, our email will not bombard you. We send just a few updates a year. Please feel free to sign up for that mailing list, and we look forward to keeping in touch with you and with PFI as the tools and resources from this work start to roll out.
And I just encourage everyone and ask everyone to fill out the evaluation form that I thought I just popped in the link, but that was just our website again. Hold on, let me try again. There it is. Okay, I'll just take a moment, and we'd love to stay in touch with you.
I'm going to end out the presentation. Thank you everybody for coming and for bringing up the great topics you have. And thank you so much to Michael, Sue, and Julie